The biggest mistake most people make is believing they must fight for attention. The Stoics knew something different. They knew that true power comes from self-control, silence, and knowing when to walk away. In the next few minutes, you'll learn 10 timeless Stoic lessons that will make you mentally stronger, emotionally calmer, and impossible to manipulate. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the people who value you the least often realize your worth only after you're gone. Let's begin. Introduction and Lesson 1. Have you ever noticed that the people who value you the least often realize your worth only after you're gone? It's a strange truth of human nature. When you're always available, always understanding, always making an effort, people slowly begin to take your presence for granted. Not because you're weak, but because familiarity often blinds people to value. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. They knew that true power isn't found in chasing approval. It's found in self-respect, in knowing when to stay, and knowing when to walk away. Today, you'll discover 10 powerful Stoic lessons that reveal what happens when you stop chasing, stop begging, and start choosing yourself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why silence can be more powerful than words, why distance creates value, and why the strongest people are often the ones who know how to leave. Let's begin. Lesson number 1. People notice your absence more than your presence. Most people don't appreciate the light while it's shining. They only notice the darkness after it's gone. Think about that for a moment. When you constantly text first, when you're always available, when you're always solving problems, people start expecting it. What was once appreciated becomes normal. What was once valuable becomes invisible. But the moment you stop, everything changes. Suddenly they notice the empty space, the missing message, the missing support, the missing energy you used to bring into their life. At first they may act like they don't care. They may tell themselves they'll be fine. But deep down, something feels different. Something feels missing. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that everything in life is temporary. Every relationship, every opportunity, every person. Yet most people live as if the people around them will stay forever. That's why your absence becomes such a powerful teacher. It forces others to experience a reality they never prepared for. A reality where you're no longer there. And that's often the moment they begin to understand your true value. Not when you were giving everything. Not when you were trying your hardest. But when your presence becomes a memory. Remember this. People rarely notice how much you do until you stop doing it. And when they finally realize what they've lost, the lesson has already begun. Think about the people in your life for a moment. How often do they truly notice what you do for them every single day? The effort you put in, the time you give, the support you offer, the consistency you bring. Most of the time, it goes unnoticed. Not because it has no value, but because human nature adapts quickly to comfort. When something is always available, it slowly stops feeling special. It becomes expected, and what is expected is rarely appreciated the way it should be. This is where distance changes everything. The moment you stop giving constant access to yourself, people are forced to experience your absence. And that absence creates clarity. They begin to notice the silence, the missing conversations, the energy that used to fill the space. At first, they may ignore it. They may distract themselves. They may act like nothing has changed. But internally, something feels different. A gap they didn't realize existed starts to grow. And slowly, that gap turns into awareness. Because sometimes, people don't understand your value when you are present. They understand it when you are gone. There is something most people don't realize. The harder you try to make someone value you, the more you slowly lose your own value in their eyes. Not because you are worth less, but because chasing creates imbalance. And imbalance destroys respect. True value never needs to be proven repeatedly. It is either recognized or it is ignored. And when it is ignored despite your efforts, you are no longer being seen for who you are. You are being seen for what you give. This is where Stoic thinking becomes powerful. Because the Stoics didn't chase approval. They didn't beg for attention. They didn't over-explain their worth. They simply focused on what they could control. Their actions, their discipline, their character. And when you start living like that, something shifts. You stop trying to convince people. You stop forcing connections. You stop lowering yourself to be accepted. And you begin to understand a simple truth. The right people never require chasing. And the wrong people were never worth chasing in the first place. Most people don't lose relationships in one moment. They lose them slowly. In silence. In small ignored actions. In repeated emotional neglect that no one talks about. It starts when messages are left unanswered, when feelings are brushed aside, when effort is no longer matched. And at first, nothing seems wrong, but distance builds quietly, until one day, the connection doesn't feel like it used to. This is the moment where Stoic awareness becomes important, because instead of reacting emotionally, you begin to observe. You stop asking, "Why aren't they valuing me?" and start asking, "Why am I staying where I'm not valued?" The Stoics believed something powerful. You don't control how people treat you, but you control what you accept. And the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve, you change the entire direction of your life. Not by forcing others to change, but by choosing yourself. One of the biggest mistakes people make is confusing attention with respect. Just because someone talks to you every day doesn't mean they value you. Just because someone wants your time doesn't mean they respect your presence. Many people love what you provide, the comfort, the support, the validation. But very few people truly appreciate the person behind it all. And that's why so many people feel exhausted. They're giving everything they have, yet receiving very little in return. The Stoics warned against this. They believed that a wise person should never depend on external approval for inner peace. Because the moment your happiness depends on someone else's behavior, you surrender your freedom. And freedom is too valuable to give away. The moment you understand this, you stop seeking validation and start building self-respect. Imagine how much energy people waste every day trying to be liked, trying to be accepted, trying to fit into places where they don't belong. The Stoics chose a different path. They focused on becoming better, not becoming popular, because popularity comes and goes, but character stays. And when your character becomes stronger, something incredible happens. Rejection stops feeling personal. Criticism loses its power, and the opinions of others stop controlling your emotions. You begin to understand that your worth was never determined by how many people chose you. Your worth was determined by how you chose yourself. And that realization changes everything. There comes a point in life when you stop explaining yourself, not because you have nothing to say, but because you realize something important. The people who truly understand you don't need long explanations, and the people who don't won't understand you anyway. So you begin to conserve your energy. You stop over-explaining your actions. You stop justifying your decisions. And you stop trying to convince people who have already made up their mind about you. The Stoics called this inner clarity, a state where your peace is no longer dependent on being understood, but on understanding yourself. And when you reach this level of awareness, something powerful happens. You stop reacting emotionally to every misunderstanding. You stop chasing approval from people who were never meant to value you. And you start making decisions based on truth, not validation. You realize that silence is sometimes more powerful than arguments. Distance is sometimes healthier than explanations. And walking away is sometimes the most peaceful answer. Because not every situation deserves your energy. Not every person deserves your explanation. And not every battle is worth fighting. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't fight to be heard by everyone. They focused on staying aligned with themselves. And that is where real strength begins. One of the most powerful Stoic principles is this. You cannot control how people treat you. You cannot control how they behave. You cannot control whether they understand you or not. But you can always control yourself, your reactions, your boundaries, and your decisions. Most people suffer because they focus on things they cannot change. They try to fix people. They try to force understanding. They try to change situations that are beyond their control. But the Stoics took a different approach. They shifted their focus inward. They focused on their discipline, their mindset, and their actions. Because real peace does not come from controlling others. It comes from controlling yourself. And the moment you accept that truth, life becomes lighter, calmer, and far more powerful. Silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means weakness. They think silence means you have nothing to say, or that you are losing the situation. But in reality, silence is control. When you stop reacting instantly, when you stop replying emotionally, when you stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen, you begin to regain your power. The Stoics practiced silence not because they were powerless, but because they understood something deeper. Not every situation deserves a reaction. Not every comment deserves a response. And not every person deserves your energy. Every time you react emotionally, you lose a little control over yourself. But when you choose silence instead, you protect your peace, you protect your focus, and you protect your strength. Silence is not emptiness. It is discipline. And discipline is the foundation of true Stoic power. One of the hardest truths to accept in life is this. People don't always leave suddenly. Most of the time, they leave slowly. Emotionally first, then mentally, and finally physically. It starts when effort is no longer matched, when care is no longer noticed, when feelings are no longer acknowledged. At first, it feels small, almost unnoticeable, but over time, distance builds, and what once felt strong starts to feel empty. The Stoics understood this clearly. Nothing in life is guaranteed to last forever. Not people, not relationships, not situations. That's why awareness matters. Because when you start noticing the signs early, you stop forcing what is already fading, and you begin to protect your peace before it's too late. There comes a moment when you realize something powerful. Not everyone deserves your explanation. Not every situation needs your energy. And not every person deserves your emotional effort. Most people waste years trying to prove themselves, trying to be understood, trying to fix misunderstandings that were never meant to be fixed. But the Stoics believed in something different. They believed in choosing peace over unnecessary conflict, and clarity over emotional chaos. Because every time you try to convince the wrong people, you lose focus on the right things. When you stop explaining yourself, you start observing more. You start thinking clearly, and you start protecting your energy. This is where real maturity begins. Not in reacting, but in understanding when not to react. At some point in life, you stop chasing people's approval. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood your worth. You realize that no amount of explaining can change someone who has already decided not to understand you. And no amount of effort can fix a connection that was never mutual. The Stoics called this emotional independence, a state where your peace is not controlled by external validation, where your value is not decided by others, and where your confidence comes from within. When you reach this state, you stop overthinking every interaction. You stop fearing rejection, and you stop needing constant reassurance. Because you understand one simple truth. Your worth was never meant to be negotiated. It was meant to be recognized. And if it is not recognized, you move forward anyway. One of the final stages of growth is learning this truth. You don't need to react to everything. Not every action deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves attention. And not every situation deserves your energy. The more you react, the more you lose control of yourself. But the more you observe, the more powerful you become. The Stoics believe that self-mastery begins when you stop being emotionally reactive. Because reaction is instant, but wisdom takes time. When you pause instead of reacting, you gain clarity. And in that clarity, you make better decisions. This is where emotional strength is built. Not in speaking more, but in reacting less. Most people misunderstand strength. They think strength means arguing. They think strength means proving a point, or winning every conversation. But real strength is quieter than that. It is the ability to stay calm when others are emotional, to stay silent when others are reactive, and to stay centered when others try to disturb your peace. The Stoics practiced this every day. They didn't waste energy on unnecessary battles. They focused on what actually mattered: their mind, their discipline, their character. Because when your mind is controlled, everything else becomes easier to handle. Strength is not loud. It is stable. There is a point where you realize something important. Not everyone is meant to understand you. And that is okay. People see life through their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own limitations. So expecting everyone to understand you is a form of self-suffering. The Stoics accepted this reality. They didn't waste energy trying to be understood by everyone. Instead, they focused on living correctly, on being aligned with their values, and on maintaining inner peace. Because when you stop needing validation, you become free. Free from judgment, free from expectations, and free from emotional pressure. One of the deepest Stoic lessons is this. You teach people how to treat you, not through words, but through boundaries. If you accept disrespect, it continues. If you stay without limits, it becomes normal. But when you set clear boundaries, everything changes. People start to understand your value, not because you explained it, but because you demonstrated it. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about protecting your peace. And the moment you start protecting your peace, your life begins to change. At some point, you realize something very powerful. Your peace is more important than being right. Your calmness is more important than winning arguments. and your energy is more important than proving points. The Stoics lived by this principle. They chose peace over conflict, understanding over ego, and discipline over reaction. Because every unnecessary argument drains your mind. Every emotional reaction weakens your focus. But peace strengthens everything. And once you protect your peace, you protect your life. There is a shift that happens when you grow mentally. You stop trying to impress people. You stop trying to prove yourself. And you stop chasing approval. Not because you became cold, but because you became aware. Aware that external validation is temporary and internal peace is permanent. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't live for attention. They lived with intention. And when you start living with intention, you no longer depend on others to define your worth. You define it yourself. One of the hardest lessons in life is this. Not everyone will value you, no matter how much you give, no matter how much you try, and no matter how good your intentions are. Some people will still not see your worth. The Stoics didn't fight this reality. They accepted it. Because acceptance brings peace, and resistance brings suffering. When you accept that not everyone is meant to value you, you stop wasting energy on the wrong people, and you start investing in yourself. Instead, there comes a moment when everything becomes clear. You stop chasing closure. You stop seeking explanations, and you stop needing answers from others. Because you realize something important. Peace doesn't come from answers. It comes from acceptance. The Stoics believe that clarity is better than closure, because closure depends on others, but clarity depends on you. And once you find clarity within yourself, you no longer need anything from anyone else. The end of everything. The most important realization is this. You don't need to disappear to be powerful. You don't need silence to be respected. And you don't need distance to be valued. Real power comes from within, from knowing who you are, from respecting yourself, and from protecting your peace at all costs. The Stoics taught that freedom is not external. It is internal. And once you master your inner world, no one outside can control you. Not opinions, not rejection, not silence, nothing. You simply become steady, calm, and unshakable. And that is the real end of your journey. Not changing others, but mastering yourself.